We're doing things a little different today. I was hired to cook for a small party for New Year's Eve, so I thought I'd bring you along for the ride. So with that said, let's get started.
So the first thing I started on out of the menu was making our dessert. Some would argue that dessert's the best part out of any menu and you should start there first to begin with. So that's what I ended up doing. Wanted to make the dry caramel early on just in case if I messed it up, then I had more time to figure out how to do it correctly, and this way it would set up and be ready to go to make our chocolates later. We'll talk about the menu and the party real fast. So first off, this is my first time ever doing a party like this by myself. I do have catering experience, but this is a way different doing it on your own. I was feeling really ambitious and did a 5-course menu. I did an appetizer, a soup, another appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. I try to keep the menu super winter forward because when this menu came out, or when I created the menu, it was winter time, so I try to use a lot of winter vegetables for it and just try to keep it in season as much as possible. I had to dig real deep into my shallow bag of tricks to make up the menu, but in the end it worked really well. After I made the caramel for our dessert, I moved on to making a honey, fresh thyme, and ginger gastrique. This will be for our first course, and this is a fairly easy recipe to do. All you do is add equal parts of sweet to acidic. I went with a local honey and then added the same amount of white distilled vinegar. Then I added a knob of some fresh ginger and a few bunches of fresh thyme as well. And this was for their first course, which is sweet potato chips with this honey gastrique and plain yogurt. I have a book that tells you what foods pair really well together. I looked up sweet potatoes and saw that ginger and thyme and honey pair well with it. So I kind of threw this together on a whim and made it up, and it worked out pretty well actually. After I started the first gastrique, I moved on to the next. This is a maple gastrique. Instead of honey, I used maple syrup and then used the same amount of white distilled vinegar. So it's the same exact method and steps of the first gastrique. This will be for our third course, and this was another easy one to start. After I had the 2 gastriques going on the back burners, I started on our second course, which is roasted butternut squash soup. I have a full video on this, so you can go check that one out. I'll leave a link in the description so you can go find it. This course ended up being a huge hit because some of the guests absolutely love butternut squash soup. It's one of their favorite soups, so that was a huge win for me, or started this whole process of making the menu and prepping and things like that. The first thing I asked the guests were if there was anything that they were allergic to or things that they didn't like to eat. After I was told what to stay away from and that there weren't any allergies, that definitely helped to create the menu. The first thing I did was create the menu, of course, and then after making the menu, made a laundry list of different things, and one of the lists I made was a grocery list. Knocked that out and went to the store and got all the good stuff so we could start prepping. After the butternut squash was in the oven, we moved on to the next thing, which is trimming up our broccoli. The broccoli is a side dish to our entree. I ended up using 3 broccoli heads. We're trimming off the stems just like we did in our broccoli salad video, so go check that one out if you haven't seen it. And broccoli's a great winter vegetable. It worked really well for our entree course. I'm trimming these so we can blanch them. Then the night of the party, we'll finish cooking them off. We'll saute them in some butter and some fresh lemon zest, which lemon and broccoli go really well together. And it was a really nice, light, and fresh side to a heavy meat and potatoes dish. Then after I peeled off the ugliness to our Brussels sprouts, I busted out the mandolin and started to shave our Brussels sprouts pretty thin. And you gotta be super careful when you're using a mandolin because this thing can cut your entire arm off if you're not careful. I used to shave cases of Brussels sprouts at the restaurant I used to work out. I'm pretty used to working with a mandolin. This used to be one of our tapas on the menu, and I worked saute station. I used to cook like 50 to 100 of these a night, a lot of these on the weekends because people enjoyed them and really loved them. So I've seen a lot of these in my time, and they're really good, so I understand why people enjoy them. Brussels sprouts are kind of bitter on their own. That's why it pairs really well with our maple gastrique to add some sweetness to combat that bitter flavor. I grabbed our Dutch oven so we could cook off some bacon and make it nice and crispy. And a pro tip, if you want crispy bacon, start with a cold pan so you can render out as much fat as possible oil from your bacon. This is the same exact method that we used for our bacon jam. We're making crispy bacon for our third course, which will be the shaved Brussels sprouts with crispy bacon that'll be tossed in a maple gastrique and garnished with a 6-minute egg and some shaved Parmesan cheese. I grabbed a pot of water so we could cook our 6-minute eggs. 6-minute eggs are basically like a ramen egg. So if you've never had ramen, it's an egg that's all nice and yolky, but all the whites are cooked. They're super delicious. After I shaved the Brussels, we moved on to our sweet potatoes. We're gonna start to make our sweet potato chips. This will be for our first course. All I did was cut off the ends of our sweet potatoes and cut off any big roots that were on them. And then I busted out the mandolin and started to cut them on the mandolin as well. After I got our sweet potatoes cut, I grabbed myself a medium-sized bowl and some oil and gave our sweet potato chips a good coating in oil. This will help crisp them up while they bake in the oven and get that nice color on them as well. Like I had mentioned before, I made a ton of lists for this menu. So the first thing I made, of course, was the menu, then made the grocery list like we talked about. And then after that, I made 2 different prep lists. One prep list with a ton of notes that would help me and remind me of certain techniques for certain dishes. And then I broke that down even further and made an actual prep list of all the things that I needed to do that I could work off of and cross things off once they were done, so I could see some forward momentum and some progress being made. I grabbed a large pot of water and salted it heavily so I could blanch the fingerling potatoes, which will be another side dish to our entree. We're gonna blanch them until they're nice and fork tender and then finish cooking them off the day of the party. And if you've never worked in a kitchen before, you try to do as many things as you possibly can at one time. So this way you have good time management and you're able to get a lot of things done in a timely fashion and do it correctly. Sear off all of our short ribs for our main course. And this chuck short rib was pretty fatty and had quite a bit of silver skin, so I cleaned it all up. I picked the beef short ribs as the main course for the menu because I'm pretty familiar with them. We used to run an entree at the restaurant I used to work at as a menu item, so I knew how to execute it and I knew what it would look like. And also it's one of those dishes that's fairly easy and not too complicated that I would be able to pick it up on my own the day of the party. Even though it's a fairly simple dish, it's really easy to execute and it packs a ton of flavor, and I knew it would be a great course for our menu and that everybody would enjoy it. After I got all of our short ribs seared off, I grabbed a can of tomato paste and threw all of our roasted veggies in our Dutch oven along with our tomato paste so that we can get that nice caramelization on the tomato paste, which will add a ton of flavor to our dish. This is the same exact method that we use in our Rigatoni Alla Vodka video. After I got a nice caramelization on our tomato paste, I added some red wine to deglaze our pan. This way I can scrape the bottom of our Dutch oven to get all that nice delicious fond that was created by searing the meat and some of that caramelization and fond that we got from our tomato paste. Then I cooked our red wine down for about 4 to 5 minutes to cook out all the alcohol and really concentrate the flavors with the tomato paste and the veg and the red wine. This way we had a nice delicious base to throw our short ribs on top. Then covered it with some beef stock. You want to ensure that you cover everything with beef stock so that all of your meat is submerged. This way it can braise. After everything was covered with our beef stock, I threw the lid on it and threw it in our oven to braise for about 3 hours until it was nice and tender. But to finish off the prep, all I needed to do was make the au jus, or the sauce that was for our short ribs, which is just all the braising liquid that we used to braise our short ribs. After I reduced it down a bit and the flavor on it was super delicious, I started on the dessert course to finish it up. So our dessert is a chocolate salted caramel bar and they came out super delicious. Not an expert when it comes to dessert making. That's why I chose this dessert, because it's fairly easy to execute, but still it'll pack a punch and bring a ton of flavor and delicious goodness to finish off the 5-course meal. And it pushed me to step out of my comfort zone and do new things like making the caramel or just making chocolates in general. And I had a ton of fun with this. I honestly kind of want to get a job now making candies. I bought my guests a bottle of sparkling rose wine, and then my mom made this really cool embroidered bag that holds wine or champagne or any liquor bottle or anything that you really want to throw in it. She embroidered this and made this bag, and it came out super cool and it worked really great. And both of these items were a small gift to the guests, a nice little touch touch to the whole aesthetic of the party. I was super fortunate and they allowed me to film while I was at their house. So I had to pack all this stuff up and take it over to their house for the party, which was very nice and this is super cool. So I get to bring you along for the journey and you get to see it all the way through from prep to pickup, which is awesome. So the first thing I did was unpack all of the coolers and put everything away that was temperature sensitive. Once I got all of the dry goods in my station set up, I started to find all the pans that I needed to use, the pans, the lids, the pots, anything of that nature that I was going to need. I had it all set out and ready to go. This way it made service a bit quicker and a lot easier instead of having to scramble and find everything during the middle of service. The first thing I did to start off the dinner was present the guests with their two gifts, the sparkling wine and the wine bag, and told them about the menu, and then that dinner would start and we rolled right into service. After I presented the gifts and talked about the menu to the guests, we rolled out with our first course, which was really easy to pick up. It was the sweet potato chips with a plain yogurt and honey gastrique for dipping sauce. I threw down a swoosh of our plain yogurt. This is Noosa yogurt, which is local to us, and I used local honey, so it was a nice local dish, which is pretty cool. And I only made 2 plates for this one, even though there's 4 guests. This is a shared dish between the 2 couples. Then in the center of our yogurt, I threw down our honey gastrique to give it that nice little aesthetic look. And off to the side that you can't really see, I have the menu right next to me. This way I wouldn't forget anything because I was super nervous at the beginning, but as we rolled through the courses, it got a little bit easier for me. Then off to the side, the opposite side of our yogurt and gastrique, I threw down our sweet potato chips, and that's it for course 1. Then after course 1 was done, we rolled into course 2. Then to finish off our butternut squash soup, I garnished it with some sour cream. Then I finished the soup off with some salted pumpkin seeds as the last garnish for the soup, and that's it for course 2. These bowls were extremely hot on the sides and the bottom, so that was a ton of fun carrying them to the table with some tender little ball catchers, and yeah, they were real spicy and hot to carry. Then after we took out the soup, I started on course 3, which is our shaved Brussels sprouts. So in a large saute pan, I threw down a little bit of oil and let that heat up before I started cooking our Brussels. Then after the oil was hot enough, I threw down our bacon to heat it back up and to get it even more crispy. Once our bacon was nice and crispy, I threw in our shaved Brussels sprouts to start to cook them as well with our bacon. So the bacon, of course, will have a little grease, so that'll coat our Brussels sprouts and make them even more delicious. And I'm predominantly right-handed, but this is pretty much like the only thing I can do left-handed is saute, which is funny. And then give those a little salt and toss it all up, coat everything in salt. And once our Brussels were nice and cooked thoroughly, I added a few spoonfuls of our maple gastrique and tossed all of our Brussels and bacon in the gastrique till everything was nice and coated with our maple. Now that the eggs were heated through and our Brussels were cooked thoroughly, I grabbed 4 plates and set them out to make our third course, which is the shaved Brussels sprouts and crispy bacon tossed with the maple gastrique and garnished with a 6-minute egg and Parmesan cheese. I plated everything right in the center and mounted it up so it was nice and tall and high. Then I made a little nest in the center of it so our 6-minute egg could rest inside there. Once our eggs were in their little nest of Brussels sprouts, I finished off the dish and garnished them with some shaved Parmesan Reggiano, and the egg was still hot, so some of the cheese melted, which made it look even more delicious. And some of the guests either have never had Brussels or didn't like them, but after they had this, they really enjoyed this dish. It's because sugar makes everything better. And that's it for course number 3. After we ran out course 3, we started on course 4, which is our entree, and I was gonna do roasted fingerling potatoes in the oven, but the oven just wasn't hot enough, so we ended up sauteing them in the large pan with some butter because I wanted to get that nice crispy texture on our potatoes, and that was the next best option because the oven just wasn't hot enough. After I got the potatoes started right there in the middle pan, I started on our broccoli, threw down some butter, and threw in 2 quarts of broccoli. Then in the back corner, I started to heat up our au jus, our sauce for our short ribs, and had that on really low heat so it wouldn't reduce any further than it already was. And then in the last and final pan, I threw down some avocado oil and got that pan ripping hot so we could get a nice sear on the outside of our short ribs. Once our pan was ripping hot, I threw in a little bit of salt and started to throw in our short ribs so we can get a nice sear on them. I portioned out our short ribs so that they were easier to eat and made them flat so that they would stand up, and then I could get a nice sear on each side of the short rib. And it was super easy to get a good sear on these because of the gas burners compared to the electric ones. So I was super happy with that. And I let them sear on each side for about 2 to 3 minutes or until they were nice and crispy and delicious looking. And once our short ribs got that nice hard sear on them, I flipped them over so the other side could get a nice hard sear. And once everything was heated all the way through and our short ribs were done, I started to plate them. I didn't really like the plating on this. I could have definitely done it a lot better. So I put the potatoes to one side and then threw our broccoli on the other side. After I had everything plated, I finished off with our au jus sauce by pouring some over the meat so that it would soak up in the meat and make it even more delicious. And that's it for course 5, our main course, the braised short ribs with sauteed broccoli with lemon butter and our roasted fingerling potatoes. Then we finished strong with our dessert, which was the chocolate salted caramel bars. I was super nervous about the numbers. I was worried that I was gonna break them or drop them right before taking them to the table, which would have been a really sad day and would have sucked because I worked so hard on them. And the 2022 was a shareable for the whole table, and then I made 2 small plates with the other chocolates that could be shared between the 2 couples. And that's it for course 5, the dessert, and that's it for the whole party.
So in the end, the food came out super delicious. The guests really loved it, and they had a ton of fun on New Year's Eve and just cut up a rug and really enjoyed themselves. And I also had a lot of fun cooking and just getting my hands dirty and getting back in the kitchen and doing something like this. So we'll crunch some numbers real fast. The total cost for the food was $136. That includes the wine that I used to braise the short ribs. So if you take 136 divided by the 4 people at the party, that would be $35 per person. But my friend and I also ate, and we ate all the courses as well. That was a little bit that was left over of food, and I had to feed him because he helped, which was a ton of help actually, so thank you, Tyler. So if you divide that again by 6 people, that came out to about $22 per person. So that's really dang good for 6 people to eat that amount of food or that many courses for that cheap is really good. You definitely can't find that in a restaurant. So yeah. So I forgot to mention earlier when I was crunching the numbers, I put around 20 plus hours into this. This includes the grocery shopping, making the menu, making the prep list, doing a ton of dishes, the cooking the night of the party. And there's a few things that I think slowed me down to make that such a high number of hours that was put into this. The first one is the sweet potato chips. I bake those instead of frying them. Baking them takes a long time because it's a low and slow process compared to frying them. They would just go a lot faster, of course. But as we all know, baked chips are a lot healthier for you. And then I try to film as much as possible. Of course, you didn't see everything, but I try to film almost every step to each course so you had an idea of what was going on. I think that slowed me down just a bit, but that might be a lame excuse, and yeah, I don't know, I haven't really decided or not. So yeah, and doing this in a home kitchen, of course, I don't have as many tools as I would if I were doing this in a professional kitchen where I'd have multiple ovens and a fryer, a lot more space to make it happen a lot faster. But in the end, you just gotta work with what you got. Alright, that's it for today's video. There's no recipe to talk about, so I'm kind of thrown off here. Anyways, you got to see what it was like to make a menu and see it all the way through, all the way to service, which is pretty cool if you've never had that experience. And you kind of see what it's like to work in a kitchen. Of course, you didn't see everything, and this isn't a professional kitchen, but you got the idea of what it takes and how much work it is to do something like this. And hopefully you learned some new things. I definitely learned a lot of things along the way, some new kitchen techniques and some business skills that I can use moving forward, which is always really great to keep progressing and learning new things. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. Thanks for watching. And I think I'm gonna go take a nap now because, yeah, seems like the right thing to do. So I'll see you on the next one. Also, Happy New Year. And then of course, after the grocery list, menu. So in the end, everybody really enjoyed their New Year's Eve and really enjoyed the food. Everything came out super great. Everything was, you already said everything. I show you guys as much as possible on each course of what I was doing, and I think that slowed me down just a touch, and I wanted to film it to show, and I already said that. Alright, that's it for this video.